everyone. My name is Chris Hooks. A little bit of a background about me. I have a master's in economics from Southern Illinois University. I've also worked on a variety of projects, including community surveys, economic impact studies, and lobbying in support of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I've also worked as a business advisor in Ghana while I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and a few other things. I've taught economics and ran a few businesses. But enough about me, on to the topic of today, and thank you all for joining as well. I'm going to talk about an astounding lack of data. I know the irony because it's a data conference and everything, but imagine for a second that you are running a business, and this is a large business where you have multiple individual divisions, and you only get an annualized report of the activities in each one of those divisions after like 1 to 2 years. Now, question, how well could you make decisions regarding your business with this type of data? And secondly, how successful do you think your business would be? Is it going to be sustainable for the future? Or are you going to succumb to poor decision making and the results of those? Chances are your business is going to fail. Now, keep that in the back of your mind because we're not talking about business data here. We're actually talking about sustainable cities. And currently, in my opinion, I should say, sustainable cities are impossible within our current framework. And why is that? Well, because cities lack data and they lack capacity. They don't have data analytics divisions. The majority of cities don't, at least. And there's a solution, though. Localizing the data collection processes. And then second of all, for the economy and developing a sustainable city, let's begin by modeling the cash flows within the community. Now, our goal, right, is to, as part of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I believe it's number 11, is to have sustainable cities and communities by, say, 2030. How is it that we're going to do this, right? But first of all, because if you search online, you can find a lot of different information about sustainability and a lot of different viewpoints. So let's start by, first of all, defining what is a sustainable city. Now, this is a bit of my own narrative here, but a sustainable city is a city that tries to live in harmony with nature and society in a way that ensures its viability for the future. That means that we're looking at things such as housing, transportation, communications, waste management, resources, environment, and socioeconomic equity. Now, you might ask, what is socioeconomic equity? Well, consider the situation in the U.S., and I speak from a U.S. perspective because I live here and have pretty much my entire life, but we have billionaires, and I cannot do the Bernie voice, I would love to, but we also have a massive proportion of our population that is homeless or near homelessness because they, quite frankly, are struggling to make ends meet, living from paycheck to paycheck, and burying themselves in debt. And this is not a way to have a sustainable society for the future. So we need to do something about this. But the question is, how do we do this when our cities have little access to timely local data? Now, for example, let's look at some of the data that cities do actually have available and pay special attention to the years. Now, I picked Wake County because SAS is located and headquartered in Wake County, but if you want to look at annualized data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis on GDP per sector, per individual region, you can go back to 2001, and the most recent is 2018. Now, last I checked, it's 2020. And so remember that first slide, making decisions based upon data that's 1 or 2 years old and it's just annualized to begin with? This is the kind of data that our cities have readily available to them. Let's move on to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, this is actually relatively new, and this is kind of cool, but we can actually get quarterly employment numbers and average pay, total payroll per quarter, per industry, per county in the United States. However, this is also for Wake County, and this is the most recent, and this is Q3 of 2019. And currently, we are basically at the end of Q1 of 2020. So there's still a time lag. It's better and more detailed, but it's still not that great if you were going to run a business off of this. Now, let's move on to the Census Bureau. Now, this is the county business patterns. They go from 1946 all the way up to, if you check out the year here, it is 2017. And again, let me remind you, look at the bottom right corner. This is the SAS Global Form in 2020. So, what kind of data are city managers using, our city economic planners using when they're making decisions based on or for economic development funds? Where are these funds going, right? So, can you imagine making business decisions with this amount of data, with this timeliness of data? It's probably not going to end up very well for you. So, if that's the case, if it doesn't work for a business, how can our cities make equitable decisions when they have such little data? This is a major problem. And on top of that, as per my own personal experience, and I know as a statistician, this is a little bit of an anecdotal story, but the city managers and the city leaders that I have worked with generally don't have that great of an understanding of the importance of data. They say, okay, data is important, but they don't actually understand data. They don't understand statistics. And it's not like I'm trying to slam them. They just haven't been trained, and they don't have departments or divisions of the city government that are focused on analyzing local economic data. And this is a problem. So here's another graphic, and I'm not sure if you can see. You might have to pause the video and zoom in a little bit if you can. But this is from the U.S. City Open Data Census. And they call it a census, but it only has like 266 locations, and there's several thousand cities in the United States alone, so it's not really a census, more of a sample. But number 10 is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it has a 78% score. And what that means is that 78% of the data sets that the city of Pittsburgh has as a municipality are accessible for the public. Now, accessible city data is essential. Imagine you're going to park. Well, I know we're not in DC, but imagine you wanted to go park your car in DC and you wanted to look for a parking spot. It's kind of hard, right? You can pull out your smartphone and find an empty parking spot, right? But that all happens because of open data and API access to that data, right? So that brings me to my next point. I propose a Copernican revolution in economic analysis. And think about that for a second. Can you answer, what's the GDP of your city? Now, if we went back a few slides, you can get that data, but you're going to have to go back to like 2018. So what is it in 2019? Now, what about the GDP of your state? Do you know? Chances are you probably don't. What about the national GDP? Yeah, people probably can guess at it. They know if it's doing good or bad, but really what does the national GDP have to do with them and their local area? How much of an impact does the change in the national GDP have on their city? How many people in your city struggle to pay their bills every month? The GDP may be growing, but if the number of people in your city struggling to pay their bills every month is also growing, then that does not seem to be very sustainable for the future. So while most people know the national but not the state or the local GDP, they might know how many people, unless you have a really innocuous peer group and don't really get out and see what's actually going on a day-to-day basis in the city, you might not really realize the full extent of what's going on in the economy. And that might have sounded a little bit confusing, but think about it. If your focus is on the state, or not the local, but on the national GDP, and it's growing, while at the same time the number of citizens in your city struggling to pay their bills every month is growing, there's kind of a mismatch of information. Why is the economy of your local city not more important? Now, let me take this time to make a note. GDP is not the end-all, be-all, most important metric of economic activity. I could say that I ate 20 kilos of food last week, but that doesn't tell you much of anything. GDP is basically a quantity measure. So I could have eaten 20 kilos of potato chips, and that would have been really, really unhealthy for me. Likewise, I could have had 20 kilos of fruits and vegetables, and that would have been much healthier. So GDP doesn't consider things like, income equality. That's an important factor, because if people on the lower spectrum of the end of the socioeconomic spectrum don't have enough cash to pay their bills, they're struggling to survive, that they are the foundation of the economy. And if you have ever looked at a building with a cracked foundation, hopefully you didn't buy it, because it is bound to have massive issues. So we need to shift our focus away from managing a large heterogeneous national economy and focus on our local economies. Basically what I'm saying is, how do firms and individuals interact within the community? We don't really have data on this. As an economist, we talk about rational agents and representative agents and such, but is that really how people make decisions? People don't sit there and do a calculus problem to go and buy groceries, or decide whether or not they're going to have that candy bar when they're at the gas station. It's just not how people really work. Now, granted, calculus and algebra are very important still. So how would you go about managing a local economy? Well, I propose using an investment portfolio approach. With an investment or with a portfolio manager, the portfolio manager is sitting there analyzing data and making decisions on which stocks to buy, which stocks to sell, because their goal is to optimize or maximize the return on the portfolio while at the same time minimizing the risk. Now, if city managers or cities looked at the local economy as the city's economic portfolio, can't they do basically the same thing? No, they can't go and buy and sell shares of stock in individual companies and individual sectors or subsectors of the economy, but they have other tools. So from a city's perspective, it's more like a business, and you're looking at several projects, and how do you choose between all of these projects? Do you start this project, terminate this project? How do you make those decisions? You're looking at the incremental cash flows forecasted into the future, and you're trying to estimate what is the net present value of that. And by maximizing the net present value, you're also maximizing your value of your company or your stock price, right? So what if cities kind of took the same ideological framework and applied it, right? And case in point, I have to say, portfolios are all about diversification. You do not, while you can invest in one stock and you can possibly get a really big return, you can also possibly get a really, really big loss. So we want to diversify our local economies so that we don't end up with another situation such as Detroit. So from the idea of targeting economic sectors with a portfolio framework in mind, economic development funds can be targeted at developing specific sectors, subsectors, targeted industries, etc. But those industries should not remain dependent upon subsidies in order to survive. 5 years, you should be able to phase out your subsidies, maybe 10 years max. You don't want the case of like having imagine being a parent or something, which I have no kids. But imagine having a kid that grew up and never was able to go and take care of themselves. And it wasn't for lack of ability, they just had lack of motivation. You don't want to have a situation like that. Consider the energy industry in the United States. Consider the agriculture industry in the United States. Both of these industries are massively subsidized. Energy is an input to basically every single manufacturing process, and it's also an input to transportation. Agriculture, everybody needs food to survive, right? Why is it we have massive subsidies for these areas of the economy? That's a question that you can ponder in your minds. So, how does a city go about determining where funds should go and what areas to develop? That's a good question, but this is precisely why we need better data, because without that data, we cannot really go and say, well, this area is better because it's going to generate more revenue and recirculate that cash back into the local economy. I watched a documentary several years ago, cannot remember the name of it, but they basically took a couple of beavers and put it in this little ravine with a stream running through it out in the middle of, I think it was Nevada. And it was basically a completely barren area. All those beavers went and they built a dam, and that water backed up and it pooled up, and it stayed in that area for a longer period of time before it finally left. And over the course of a few years, it completely changed that little microenvironment and brought life to the area. In the same sense, cities can target funds in order to recapture cash that's already exiting their communities, to kind of capture that, recirculate it through the economy again, and then let the cash flow out. For example, did you know that the average plate of a plate of food travels an average of about 1,500 miles from the farm to your plate? Now, food is a basic necessity of life. 1,500 miles away from your community. What if that food was grown locally? That would generate a cash recirculation that is sustainable and necessary just for in order to be able to live, you have to eat. So this is essentially a massive cash flow that's just exiting the city. And there's a lot of others, but that's just one example. So in order to actually tackle this issue of collecting data, you need to first understand the data generating process. And essentially, you can view the economy as a series of trades. We don't really live in a barter economy. I'm not going to the grocery store and saying, well, let me stock shelves for like 2 or 3 hours so that I can get some food to eat. No, we go and exchange our time as labor for money. We loan out our funds, our capital for money, and then we take that money and exchange it for goods. Each one of those transactions is a cash flow within the economy, and that cash flow is also represented by either a flow of time from me as labor, capital, or there's an associated good or service. But we're not actually tracking these transactions. We are, but it's kind of piecemeal, right? So cities should invest. If we want to have a sustainable city, they should invest in data collection, warehousing, and analysis at the local level. I think I skipped something, but so in the process of collecting this transaction data on the economic activities of the area, it puts cities in the prime spot to facilitate the growth of small and medium-sized businesses. Now, I'm talking about collecting information on cash flows. So you go to the store and you buy something. I can say, well, you can go and look at your bank records and see, okay, well, I made a purchase from this merchant this day, and this was the amount of that purchase. I want to also know the goods that you purchased so that I can tie that cash flow to that good, because then I'm looking at the exchange of resources within the local economy. And that might be people might think that's a little bit intrusive, but the truth is the data is already there. The company that you purchased those goods from, if you're a rewards member, they definitely have really accurate data on all of those transactions that you've made. Your bank has information on where you spend your money. And all I'm saying is let's pair these two things together and utilize it to build sustainable cities. I have more information about data privacy issues in the paper, so please check it out. I basically don't have time to introduce that topic here. But the city can provide essential services to businesses and individuals to help them thrive. And as an example, let's look at, for a local business, one of the main reasons that startups fail is poor cash flow management. And many small business owners do not understand how to manage their cash flows effectively. They may understand how to take care of the operational side of their business, but when it comes to cash flow management, they don't know. And your mom and pop shop does not have the financial clout to fund an entire finance division. So what if these cities that are already collecting all of this data and modeling the cash flows within the community gave back to these businesses information and provided services such as inventory management, cash flow and sales forecast, capital budgeting tools, payroll services, employee scheduling, hiring, and job board services. All of these are very, very feasible and could be more efficiently provided when that data is being collected locally. What about for a citizen? How many people in the United States or around the world have a very good knowledge of personal finance? But what if I am tracking all of your, not to spy on you to see what you're buying, but for economic benefits for the community as a whole? But I'm tracking your transactions and I can categorize how much money you spent on individual goods. You know, I can take my smartphone and set up time limits on specific applications. Why can I not set up categorical spending limits? So when I go to make a purchase of a basket of goods, well, some of those goods that are in that basket might flag saying, hey, you already spent this much money, this was your budget, are you sure you want to spend this? Just make people think about that for a second. I'm not saying stop them from buying it. If they want to buy it, it's a free country, let them do what they want. But just put that alert there and let them make their own alerts. Receipt organization, no more paper receipts, they're all digitized. How many of you have lost a paper receipt somewhere or it accidentally got thrown away and, oh, I needed that? Okay? What about financial simulation tools like, say, you want to buy a house or a car? Product search, I'm doing inventory management for the local business, for all of the businesses locally. I absolutely know what is going on in every single business, like what their inventory is. I'm not sharing it with their competitors so much, but if you want to find it, let's basically think of it like a local Amazon. Need a job? You can have your profile built in a very uniform way. Businesses that are looking for employees with your skill sets would automatically be notified that, hey, you're looking for a job. You could turn that feature on just like you want to turn on a setting on your phone. There's many, many more, but unfortunately, I don't have the time to do that because I could add a lot. But please read the paper for a more thorough examination and contact me. I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions. But the main point for the future really is, in order to ensure that our descendants have a viable world to live in, we must act now to make it happen. There are many competing projects and special interest groups out there pushing their own agendas. But what's the agenda of the local populations? Do they even have a coordinated agenda? If you want a better community, a better economy, and a better future for your descendants, then you have to plan strategically and build it. Too often our governments make short-sighted, reactionary decisions to appease the public and get reelected. But if we do not learn to plan for the long term, then our species is pretty much, quite frankly, it's just doomed. And we can have a better future. Remember, we can have a better future, but it is absolutely not going to happen without planning and coordination. And better planning does not happen in an absence of data either. So if we want a better future for all, we really need to start collecting better data today. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. I'm sorry I couldn't give the list in person. It would have been so much more fun, but I'm glad, and I hope everybody's staying safe. And here's my contact information. I'm currently a student at NC State, and so when I'm no longer a student, that email is not going to work. So there's a second one. Thank you all again, and have a good day.